Welcome everyone to the Hero Life Show. My name's Daniel. We got Paulie, and we've also got today Brock Mclean with us. Brock, g'day.
Dan and Paul, thanks for having me, lads. Great to be here.
It's such a pleasure to be here with you, Brock, and thanks for taking the time out of your day to be able to have some time with us. It's the last day of lockdown in Melbourne as we see it, which is pretty cool. The next week is Men's Health Week, and it's a pretty important part of I suppose my life, Daniel's life, and in a way your life as well, Brock. And there's so many factors associated that come up for me personally, but you're part of a really interesting background, and we'd love to hear so much about your story. And a lot of that has been part of the AFL system and dealing with mental health in an AFL. Well, firstly, dealing with mental health as a man is such an incredible point of evolution. And I feel like in the past few years, there has been some breaking down of barriers where men have really allowed themselves to be a little bit more vulnerable. But I would imagine being a prominent player in the AFL during the early 2000s, it would have been very much a different story.
Yeah, well, I'll go back even further. Like, I grew up in a very old school type of family, very blue collar, very hardworking. You never complained. If there were any sort of setbacks or if you suffered any sort of injuries, you just got on with it. You didn't really, you were told just to suck it up and just get on with life. So I took that approach to pretty much everything in my life. And then when it came to football, the things that worked really well for me as a footballer and achieving my goals and getting to where I got didn't work well for me in a mental health aspect, So whenever I got a setback in footy or whenever something came up in terms of like an injury or being dropped, my attitude was, just to ignore it or just to cop it on the chin and work hard and not focus on it and get back as quickly as possible. But when you took that approach to my mental health, it had the opposite effect because it was just like, I'm ignoring all the warning signs. I'm not paying attention to what's going on in my head. And I just thought, what? The best way to deal with this is just to push through it. And anyone who's experienced their own sort of mental health challenges know that just kicks the can further down the road and makes things so much worse for yourself further down the line. So I was sort of at this, I guess, point in my life where it was like, well, I've got to unlearn so many bad habits and so many ways of going about my business that worked so well for me in the past and relearn a new way, which was completely foreign to me. So that was where the challenge was for me. And, being, as I said, coming from an old school type of family and being a footballer and, being, my reputation was being a hard footballer as well. So anything that was related to sort of mental health or anything emotionally related, I sort of, didn't really have that much respect for or never really thought was a serious problem.
And were you able to have any conversations with any teammates or coaches or mentors during your time in the AFL? Like, was there great support available for you when you did decide that you need to reach out for help?
Yeah, look, early on in my career, mental health wasn't something that was really that spoken about still. I mean, it was still a bit of a taboo subject. There wasn't really any sort of groundbreaking work or much awareness raised, certainly within footy clubs and within the broader league. It probably wasn't towards, the end of my career that, there was a lot more awareness raised around mental health. But, there were certainly towards the end of my career, there were a lot more structure and a lot more resources in place if you wanted to seek help. But that's the big caveat, the if part. The saying that comes to mind is you can lead a horse to water, but you can't force it to drink. So knowing full well I had all these resources at my fingertips, but I just wasn't ready to go and seek help, or I wasn't in a position where I felt like I was capable enough, or I still had that mindset of, if I speak up, then everyone's going to think I'm some sort of weak person, or, you know, that I'm not quite a man, or, you know, they're going to think less of me because I'm opening up about, you know, these mental health struggles that I'm happening. So it wasn't until I left the game, you know, 2 or 3 years after that I'd left the game, that I felt like I was in a position and I felt like I was ready to open up. But, you know, when I did, the AFLPA has been great in terms of the resources available to me. And it's amazing what happens when you start speaking to someone and you start, you know, seeing the results of opening up to people and talking about your problems. Just sort of snowballs in a positive way, that you see the therapeutic benefits of talking about your issues and the results that it has. So I guess that's the hardest part. It's usually the hardest part with anything. Like, you know, if you want to talk about, you know, fitness, you know, your physical fitness, the hardest part is getting your runners on first and going for a run when you want to get into a, you know, get fitter or get into a proper fitness regime. It's exactly the same with your mental health. You know, the hardest part is talking to someone first, but once you feel the benefits of actually opening up and talking to a professional, then it's like, oh my God, why have I been waiting for this for so long? There's so much therapeutic benefit in this. And, you know, I still get that feeling to this day. I've been seeing a psychologist every week for the best part of 4 years. And it is like, when I go and see my guy, go and see Luke every week, it's like taking a big emotional crap. That's probably the best way of describing it.
Can you actually take us to that time where you realized that it was the moment where you needed to take action? There was no turning back. This was the time.
Yeah, I mean, it got to a point where just what I was doing, the methods that I was using, the self-medicating, the bottling up, trying to sort of numb myself or run from my emotions, just came to a point where I sort of just erupted. It was almost like a volcano. And the people around me were so concerned and so worried about me that it was just like a point. It was like, yeah, I really don't think I can keep doing this anymore. But, you know, sort of in saying that, you know, that was just the first step of many. You know, the changes and the rewiring of my brain happened gradually over time, and there were sort of probably a lot of false rock bottoms or false bottoms along the way. So, I mean, that was a big learning curve for me as well. You know, I had this expectation that I was just, once I started seeing someone or once I started getting help, that I was just going to get better in a period of 4 to 6 weeks, and it was going to be a relatively smooth 4 to 6 weeks as well. But my psychologist put it to me in a really good analogy. I was working in the stock market at the time, and he said, you know, your recovery is like a share price chart. You know, you're going to see little peaks and troughs along the way, and your share price just doesn't go up in a straight line. You know, there are peaks and troughs and little periods of setbacks and gains along the way. But if you can get that overall general trend heading in the right direction over the longer term, you basically get to where you're going. But it just takes time. You know, I'd had such ingrained behaviors and ways of thinking, you know, for a good 30 years or, you know, 20 years of my life, that, you know, it was going to take time for me to unlearn those and relearn new behaviors.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'd love to know what it was like for your family when you started opening up. Like, how was it received from the people closest to you? Because obviously they see you in a certain way, but then when you open up in this way and that you've been silently suffering for so long, what was the impact and how have things evolved from there?
Yeah, I think certainly the females in my life, you know, my mum and my sister and, you know, close sort of female friends, they were more so relieved than anything. And they were just, you know, they could see I was struggling for so long, and they could see I was in so much pain and hurting so much that they just wanted what was the best for me. So if that meant going to therapy, or if it meant talking to a psychologist, or, you know, whatever the case was, as long as it was in my best interest and it was doing good things for me, then they were all for it. I guess it was probably more of the male influences in my life, you know, probably so much, you know, my dad's side of the family, who, again, were very much that old school way of thinking. It probably took them a long time to open up, you know, to therapy and psychology, and for them to really understand, like, how mental health works. And it's not just as simple as, you know, flicking a switch and saying, oh, you know, you're better now, and you know, they still had a lot of reservations about me going to see someone and talking to someone and really embracing that side of the therapy. But, you know, it's been a really good learning experience for them as well. And I think, you know, they've seen, you know, the benefit of getting help and talking to someone. And, you know, they've seen the worst part of me, and now they've seen the best part of me. And I think they've fully grasped, you know, the severity of mental health. And, you know, I think they've got a lot more respect and understanding of and empathy now for people who are struggling with sort of their own mental health conditions.
So you said that you've been able to have an emotional dump weekly, which is such a cathartic experience, I would imagine. Are there any kind of practical measures that come to mind that have really helped you or assisted you in being able to move along this mental health journey to get you to where you are now?
Yeah, I get one of the first pieces of advice I got from my psychiatrist was when I was in the Melbourne. I checked into the Melbourne clinic. It was just after I attempted suicide, and one of the first things he said to me was, he's like, get a piece of paper and write down 10 things that are like your natural antidepressants. So these are the things that you can immediately turn to or use straight away when you start to feel depressed or you start to feel anxious. And so you write down these things on a list, and straight away you realize, like, oh my God, these are things that are free, I can do straight away. So I think at the top of my list was like, you know, spend time with family and friends. And from there, you sort of realize the importance of social connection and opening up to your friends and family and really leaning on them in times of when you're really struggling. And that was something I had a lot of issues with because I felt like I was a burden to them. And again, I felt like I was some sort of weaker person because I was leaning on people, you know, in my lives when I was really struggling. So I guess that was probably the first piece of advice that I got, that it's still stuck to me or still stuck with me to this day. And I would encourage anyone out there, whether you're male, female, or whatever, just, you know, take the time just to write down or really think about what are your 10 natural antidepressants, things in your life that you can actually access right away that costs nothing and it can immediately have an impact and, you know, a positive impact on your mental well-being.
Yeah, that's powerful. And I guess just to like follow on from that, like people are so interested in, you know, what the morning routines are and evening routines of really anyone out there, especially in the public eye. And what we're doing is really helping people, like you said at the very beginning, have those runners ready the night before. So, you know, when you get up, there's nothing to distract you from what you want to achieve, which is go for a run. So in terms of your morning routine or any practices that you do in the morning just to get yourself going and also in the evening, what comes to mind? What are things that really support you and serve you?
Yeah, so I guess, you know, anyone struggling with mental health knows the importance of a routine. So usually in the morning I get up at the same time. You know, your sleep health is really crucial, and, you know, keeping the same sort of routine with your sleep cycles as well. So try to get up at the same time every day and take the dog for a walk. And usually, you know, that'll be for a good hour or so in the morning, and I might try and listen to a podcast depending on how I'm feeling, or I might just listen to some music as well. Music has such a profound and positive effect on me and my mood and my well-being. So that's usually the first thing, and then I'll come home and generally do some mindfulness or do a bit of meditation, whether that's guided or unguided, depending on, you know, what sort of mood I'm in at the time. And then, you know, head off to work and, you know, generally try and keep some sort of routine throughout my day, you know, take a bit of time, you know, on my lunch break, or, you know, get up and go for a walk, you know, every hour or 2 hours and just get some fresh air and some exercise. And then when I come home, you know, I spend as much time as I can with my partner, Steph, and my 5-month-old daughter, Bonnie, and, you know, really, you know, spend time with them, time that they get to spend with each other during the day that sometimes I don't get to, and just really enjoy their company, and focusing on building a relationship with my daughter as well. And then I generally try and read before I go to bed, and get some good mental stimulation in that regard, but it also helps with getting to sleep and getting tired. But I think one thing that I found as well with having a routine is that sometimes you cannot do your routine is exactly how you like it, and that's okay as well. Like, I used to get caught up. I was very much an all or nothing person, so I used to think that I had to do everything the right way all the time, and if I didn't do it the way that it was designed or the way that I wanted to do it, then that was a failure. But we're not perfect as human beings, and sometimes we can't get things done the way that we'd like to, and that's okay. But as long as your intentions and your efforts are there majority of the time, 80 or 90% of the time, the other 10% is not going to have that big of an impact on you, that it's okay not to do not to meditate 7 days a week, or not to do the routine exactly the way it's designed. So it's about being compassionate and empathetic with yourself as well, if you can't attend to those things or can't do it the way that you want to.
Absolutely. I love that, and I couldn't agree more with everything you were saying there. In fact, Dan and I were just talking yesterday on a talk to our community about the idea of everything being love all after you've completed a day. The idea of if you don't complete something to its entirety, the next day you're back at love all. Yeah. And you have the opportunity to just start a new day fresh and really take full advantage of that. And it sounds like you've got a really, really wonderful kind of routine that's supporting you and your family. And congratulations on being a father of 5 months. That's a beautiful thing. And, our community are filled with fathers. So to be able to have, I'd love to hear a little bit about you entering into fatherhood and some practices that have really, really helped you support being the dad that you are right now.
Yeah, I guess the most powerful motivation or motivating factor for me in fatherhood is, I guess, my experiences as a child. And, this is at no fault, of my dad, or there's no sort of blame placed on him, but, he was just a product of a different era. Guys back in those days, they got up, they went to work, they went to the pub after work, and, and they drank with their mates, and then they sort of came home and you saw them for an hour or two. And it was very much, that segregated type of community where, the fathers went to work and the mothers raised the children, and there was no sort of real crossover. So, that was my, I guess, experience growing up. And, I knew my dad loved me, and I knew that he cared for me, and I knew that he was always there for me. But in terms of the interaction with him as a young child, I never really sort of had that like I did with my mum. So that was my motivating factor when Bonnie was born. It was, well, I'm going to be there for her as much as I can. And, I'll go to work, and I'll provide in that context in terms of, getting the money to pay for rent and pay for food, because, Steph's at home every day with a child. But when I can, I'm going to spend as much time with her and really put the time and effort into to build that bond and build that relationship. And I guess that's been one of the real benefits of COVID and lockdown for me, is that I've been able to spend so much quality time with her, time that, most dads at this stage of their babies' lives don't get to spend with them. So I've been so lucky and so fortunate in that regard, that it really shows in our relationship as well. We have a beautiful little bond and a beautiful little connection. And, any chance that I can get to spend, one-on-one time with her and let Steph have a break, or, let Steph go off and do some things that involve some personal care for herself, I jump at that. So that's been my experience so far. And, you can always put the time in at work and make more money, but time is one thing that you'll never, ever get back. And that's one thing that I'm really cognizant of. And just putting as much time and effort in I can with building this relationship with my daughter, and it's paying off, so highly for me that, as I said, we've got this beautiful little connection, and it's the greatest feeling in the world for me.
Yeah, that's really powerful. I mean, Paulie's wife, Nat, just had baby number 2, Jude, who's now, what, 4 weeks old?
Yeah, it's
Okay.
just 5 tomorrow. Yeah, 5 weeks.
Congratulations, mate.
Yeah, thank you, mate. It's amazing. Got a little girl and a little boy now.
Oh, perfect little family.
And we've got a 10-month-old, and I completely agree. Like during lockdown, I mean, our baby Sailor was born in July, and we just had unlimited time together, and that is so precious. And that's time that, as you said, we don't get it back. So being really intentional with priorities is so powerful, and it's really nice to hear that that's what's important to you.
Yeah, well, I one of the things that I did when I was in lockdown last year, work went a bit quiet. So I was like, right, how am I going to use this time productively? Like I'm time rich at the moment. Completely reframed. I looked at it. I was like, I'm never going to have this much time on my hands. So what are we going to do with it? And then something popped up. I think it was either an email or something on LinkedIn. It was about Yale's most popular online course. And it's a course called The Science of Wellbeing. And it's basically the sort of the latest findings and research into positive psychology. And it speaks about, our attitude and our relationship, towards money and things that we think actually make us happy. So, we've probably been conditioned through, society's norms and advertising to think that, money and material things and, sort of capitalism, all these things that are going to contribute to our happiness, when the research shows that they doesn't. Money has like a limit on how much it affects our happiness and our well-being. And as long as we've got a roof over our head and enough money to put clothes on our back and to pay the bills and, to buy, to put food on the table, then, anything after that doesn't really contribute to our well-being. So that was a really good learning experience for me to learn about, the science-backed sort of research into, what makes us happy. And, I spoke before about sort of social connection and, spending quality time with the people that you care about. So either your family and friends, and how much of an impact, a positive impact that has on your well-being. So once I sort of learn about those things, then you can start to sort of tailor your life a little bit different. And you can start to actually think, well, how am I going to, what's going to give me the best opportunity of being happy and feeling, and feeling good most of the time. And so proper work-life balance. And that was for me. So, doing enough work that gave me enough income and enough money to get by and, and to achieve those things that I spoke about before. But then, whenever I had the opportunity to spend time with family or friends or my family, then I took it with both hands. So that was a really good learning experience for me, and such an insightful time in my life that, allowed me to prioritize things in my life that I know would contribute to my mental well-being and my happiness.
You talked a lot about, you use the analogy of, progress not being similar to the stocks, there being peaks and troughs. And I see a similar analogy in what you were talking about there, being actions that you take with return on investment. If you're sitting there at work, there's only going to be so much return on investment, but the time that you spend with your family and your community, that return is going to be endless.
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, social connection is such an important thing for everyone. Like, it's so crucial to our survival. And that's, it's unfortunate during, things like these lockdowns that there are people out there who live by themselves or don't really have a strong support, social support network. And, a lot of the research that I've been reading of lately is, how much of an inflammatory effect it has on our body when we're socially isolated. And then we're starting to directly correlate inflammation with depression. So you can actually see the direct cause of what social isolation can do. So, I mean, investment into things like, connection with your community, connection with friends, connection with family, not wanting to isolate yourself when you're feeling depressed or upset or anxious, which is something that I used to do all the time. When I was depressed, I felt like I wasn't worthy of my friends and my family's time, and that I deserved to be on my own. But it's actually like this sort of destructive cycle that the more you socially isolate yourself, the worse that you feel, and then the more that you feel like isolating. So if you can sort of break, if you can, sort of break out of that cycle and really invest into developing and fostering good relationships with your family and friends and in your community, then it has such a powerful effect on our mental well-being that, it's so crucial to our survival.
Yeah, that's really powerful, Brock. And just to kind of circle back to where we started, because, we're respectful of your time and it's been so amazing to connect. I just want to know, coming into Men's Health Week next week, what does men's health mean to you, and what impact does that have on you and the legacy you wish to leave Bonnie and the greater community?
Yeah, well, I think, I think about, when, I was really struggling, and one of the things I really struggled with was self-empathy and compassion. I never had any trouble with treating friends or family or anyone who I really cared about with empathy and compassion whenever they were going through a real rough period. But when it came time to sort of treat myself in that regard, I had such a huge problem with doing that. So I had to really reframe the way that I looked at that. And it was like, well, how would I treat myself, or treat myself like I would treat the people that I care about? So that was an attitude that I really started focusing on and really starting to sort of foster, sort of towards myself. So I really would encourage any man out there that, is struggling with, any sort of underlying mental health condition, or is really feeling depressed or anxious, or just struggling with anything in general, that knowing that you're not alone. Like, sometimes we can get so caught up in that we're the only person going through what we're experiencing, but to know that we're not alone and there are other people out there, and there is a real sort of sense of connection and strength in suffering together. But also to know that the real healing starts when you do open up and you really reach out to someone close to you, that, recovery is possible, and, feelings, everything is impermanent. Situations change, feelings change, emotions change. And if you can really remember that when you are struggling with a certain emotion or a certain feeling or a certain situation, that you really try and not attach to whatever it is you're experiencing at the time, that it really changes your whole outlook, and you can think, well, this will pass. This is just an emotion that I'm feeling at the moment, and it really helps you sort of get through those periods of challenging times. So be gentle on yourself, reach out to someone, because you are worthy. You're so valuable and cared for by a lot of people in your life, that they would, they would do anything, to help you out. So you are loved, you are cared for, and you are worthy. I really, truly believe that about all of us.
Yeah. Beautifully insightful words. And I know we're conscious of wrapping things up, but I've got to ask you, just to reference the morning routine that you had back then. You mentioned that you go for a walk, sometimes listen to a podcast or music, and music being a really powerful influence on your life. It's also a powerful influence on Dan and myself's life. So I'd love to know if you've got it coming intuitively to top 3 podcasts. What's the music that is, having the greatest impact on you in your formative years or now? And what would be the one book that you would gift to somebody, and that's taken deadly from Tim Ferriss straight out?
Yeah, wow. Okay. I guess so. Some of my favorite podcasts that I listen to are Tim Ferriss. He has a lot of psychedelic context on there, which is something that I've been researching probably for the past 2.5 years, and the potential therapeutic aspects that has in conjunction with psychotherapy. So Tim Ferriss, Sam Thomas, those are probably the 2 that come to mind. In terms of music, it all depends on how I'm feeling at the time. So if I'm struggling a bit, or if I am feeling, a little bit down, then I'll tend to put on a few more playlists where they tend to invoke certain emotions and make me feel a bit more alive and feel like certain emotions. Or if I need a bit of a pick-me-up, I'll put some more uplifting music on, or if I'm feeling good, I'll just put a playlist on that's just got a bit of everything and anything that I can sing along to, and really just sort of enjoy myself and feel good about myself. And in terms of a book, I probably couldn't split two. If there are any dads out there who are about to give birth or who have just given birth, I highly recommend a book called A General Theory of Love. And it talks about our emotions from a scientific aspect, but it also talks about the most important thing in a child's life, and it gives a lot of sort of detailed examples, and that is love. Like, I think sometimes we can get caught up in, you've got to provide them with this material thing, and and this and that. But the most important thing in a child's life is love, and they talk to it from a scientific aspect. So that would be one book, and the other book would be How to Change Your Mind by Michael Pollan, which is the first book I read and got my foray into psychedelics. And it talks about the history of them and the potentially powerful impact it can have on mental health conditions, and really shifting the paradigm in how we treat mentally unwell.
Love it. Brilliant.
Amazing. Yeah, great takeaways. And thank you just for sharing so openly about your experience in the mental health space, but also as a dad and just as a human being living and wanting to grow and wanting to support others in that too.
Thanks so much for having me, boys. Good on you for the work that you're doing, and hope to cross paths soon.
Brock, it's been an absolute pleasure, mate. Thanks so much.
Thanks Paul. Guys. Cheers. Thanks, Dan. Cheers. Good on you, lads.
Thanks, guys.